everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Plug in Play podcast. I am your host, Henry, and we have a continued fallout of the gaming industry. This is just part 2 of the worst podcast episode ever, followed off by more news on layoffs at Microsoft. Of course, have you heard of id Software? You know, the people behind Doom? Yeah, they're not doing so hot. We'll get into that in a minute, and along with Obsidian and ZeniMax Online. We'll hear a little bit about that. We're going to go back and delve into the topic of physical discs going away forever. That's a very hyperbolic statement, but it's what gets the clicks, baby. That's right. That conversation has surprisingly not died, and I'm excited to get back into it. I've done a lot of research on it, and I'm going to be talking to you. That's right, you, the audience in this segment, so be ready for that. And then, of course, in the impression segment, we have an interesting one. Per usual, it's Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. I jumped back into it because of the recent Switch 2 update patch, and I'm excited to talk about it. One of the most highly praised JRPGs of all time. Does it still hold up after such a long time? Originally released on the Wii, so we'll see. Check out my impressions segment. Maybe you'll learn a thing or two. But first, let me get into some housekeeping. So, you may not be aware, but you can follow us on Twitter, X, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, whatever you prefer, and it is all under Plug in Play Pod 1. Leave us a comment, send us an email at pluginplaypodcast1@gmail.com. You can send a question, you can comment below. We'll be getting to that in just a second as well. We had a lot of comments this week from our TikTok users who we appreciate greatly, those weirdos over on the Chinese social media app. And I'll respond to it here on the show. I'm going to be responding to several on this show. So I hope that you do that, and we can have a little chat. That'll be fun. And then, of course, you can give us a follow on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podcast Addict, wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're there for you. That's right. And if you don't like what I have to say, and if you want to hear something else, I got timestamps. That's right. God's greatest invention to man, the timestamp for a 2.5-hour-long podcast that you don't care about 90% of what they're saying. That's right. I go through and I give you the timestamps so you can skip around, listen to something that you'd rather hear, or maybe just not listen to something at all. And, I do it for you. It's a labor of love. But that's all the housekeeping I have to get to. So, how's it been? How's your parents? How's the wife? Kids? Doing good? Good. This has been, I think we're coming off of like a really depressing time for gamers. I feel like every company last episode was just kind of trying to dump all of their worst possible information at once. The thing about Microsoft is they've been very transparent with their information about how horrifically depressing it is and how it's just going to keep happening. They've been trying to do their best to soften the blow, but it's really hard. It's very, very, very difficult, actually, when you're killing some of the most beloved studios in the gaming industry. That is hard to deal with. We'll, of course, get to that further in the episode. Last episode, I recorded on a Monday after the initial layoff news broke. I knew that was going to be a big deal. I hadn't finished recording yet, or I'd already finished recording. But I knew that news was going to break before I could post. So I was like, okay, I'll wait until Monday. We'll go over the news. We'll see what happens, and I'll talk about it then. Of course, in the coming days, we learned more about it, and that's, we heard more of the layoffs, and that's where we're getting the id news, Obsidian, all that good stuff. So that's why this news has kind of come in. This has been an incredibly slow week for news, which I was very grateful of until, I started doing the research for this episode, and it ended up I had to go down several rabbit holes in order to get the information I needed to prevent, saying something stupid on this podcast. And so I wanted to give you, the viewer, the best possible information I could. So I've done a lot of research because I have 2 topics I'm going to discuss thoroughly. Of course, the layoffs at Microsoft, and more specifically, the PlayStation physical disc fiasco. So getting into that, let's move into it, to the comment corner. That's right. Because there was no news, this has been a very slow news week in general for any news. In all honesty, without the layoffs, I would not have had probably much to talk about at all. I would have really been scraping the bottom of the barrel for news, and I honestly wouldn't have minded at all about that, because the last couple of episodes have just been exhausting to get through, in terms of editing and research and recording. They've been tough. So like I was like, I'm looking forward to a really simple episode. And then I decided to make it tough. I decided to get complicated. So, comment corner. It's where I talk to you. I go through the comments that everybody leaves on the Insta, the TikToks, the YouTube, all of them. And I look at them all and I say, what would make a good conversation? And last episode, we talked a lot about the PlayStation disc fiasco. They're canceling physical discs. They're not going to be making them anymore starting January 2028. It's going to be a massive shift in how really a lot of gamers choose to consume their media, or how they move forward with consuming media and video games at all. Some of them may be physical only, or some of them may make a lot of their financial decisions based on physical. They also may be collectors of physical editions of games. I kind of fall into a lot of those buckets. I use physical to save money and to collect and to all of the above, really. I don't exclusively play games physically, as many gamers who play a lot of games cannot, because there's only digital games for some games. But in general, I do consider myself somebody who has a very fond attachment and a usage pretty regularly for physical games. I often find them cheaper in many ways, resell them, so on and so forth. So it's very important to me. And so last episode, I felt like my response to it was I was coming off very emotional. And I mean, I think it's okay to be emotional about it. I think it's a sad thing in general. But I feel like my response was very nihilistic. It was very submissive, roll over and just kind of, open up your belly to be stabbed in the gut by Sony, kind of deal. It felt very defeatist. My stance was essentially like, the digital future was always going to come, and there's nothing we can do about it. If you don't like it, get over it. That's kind of how I, in general, in a summation, kind of talked about it. And hearing other people, this conversation has not slowed. It has been an incredibly vitriolic conversation where people are still on socials harassing Sony, trying to get them to reverse course. They're even going after developers that have nothing to do with this. Like Tito, a 3D platformer that I actually followed prior to release, was looking at their comments for their PlayStation release, and it was just, they were excited, like, oh, we got a lot of engagement, because it's a pretty small 3D platformer, and they were like, oh yeah, freak yeah, we got a lot of engagement, and it was just people saying, Sony, I hate you, please make a disc for things. And they were like, oh, well, they don't really care about our game. That's really sad. So, and I felt for that developer a little bit, but it's actually gotten, I think, the game more press than it ever would have otherwise. So kind of tying yourself into that story helps a lot, it seems. But this conversation has become, I'm used to conversations about anything on the internet lasting a total of maybe 3 days, if you're lucky. People will be angry about something for about 3 to 5 days, and then it'll be done. And that's not what happened at all. This seems to still be a significant discourse. People still seem to be very invested in this conversation, and they really want to let it be known that that is the case. And I think that's perfectly wonderful. I think I'm very glad we found something that the internet can collectively agree is worth fighting for more than 5 minutes, and then forgetting about completely. So that's a wonderful thing. However, like I said, I was pretty emotional. I don't think I did a great job addressing a lot of the situation. I think I've come around on, especially after hearing a lot of other people's opinions. I think that there is a lot to say on this that I didn't say. I did touch on most of it last episode, but in general, I don't think I said all that needed to be said. What did strike me, however, in my comments I had posted a bunch of shorts, kind of around the conversation of PlayStation getting rid of physical and saying, oh, well, it sucks, but, I understand, kind of deal. And I got a lot of comments. And what really surprised me here was one, I actually got a lot of comments that were like, I understand why they're doing it, which I didn't expect to see because I feel like I hear most of the conversation, at least tangentially, is people being very angry about it. So people being understanding is somewhat interesting to hear. But the people who did come at me and say, hey, like, I don't agree with what Sony's doing, a lot of them cited things that I I found as very interesting, very odd. I'm not even gonna say odd, but to me they seemed like they were regurgitating talking points that just simply either didn't add up or weren't completely accurate and I had heard dispelled elsewhere. And so I started looking at it and I was like, I'd really like to talk more about this subject. And honestly, I've gotten enough comments that it seems like I really probably should just address the misinformation around here and kind of try to make sense of the whole situation. So that's what I'm going to do. So we'll start off. I'll read you the comments that I'm kind of going to be talking about briefly here. They're all going to kind of tie together, so I'm going to read them all at once. Just to kind of give you an idea that I got a lot of these comments, and they're all very all over the place in terms of what they're referring to specifically. So these are all from TikTok. TikTok did very well this week. So Footy2882 on TikTok says, it comes back to the ownership rights. PlayStation accounts being able to delete your account after 18 months of inactivity is lame. Another user, Deathwatch_431 says, yeah, go take a look at the Insomniac leak stats, then come back here. And then Electro Gaming Vibe says, they have to hate what they don't understand. Just like the removal of discs when the EULA they accepted covers ownership. Also, what this guy didn't touch on is that they block your physical games from working if they choose, while mini games need the internet just to install, and Blu-ray discs only last 20 years anyway. I don't need sources for several of these. Specifically, Mr. Electro Gaming Vibes. I think his last sentence there really kind of gives him away, if I have to be quite honest. Blu-ray discs only lasting 20 years. I'm sorry, but I think it shows your age. I think when you say that, you really show your age. So, for context, physical media disintegrates, like it literally decomposes. So that's something that I didn't even really consider or think about until I took a college course on it at one point. But yeah, like everything that you own at some point will turn into ash. If you've ever gone through like your grandparents' house, you'll probably notice some like old books or something that are kind of starting to fade away or like disintegrate when you touch them. Like that's kind of the same concept. That being said, a Blu-ray disc only lasting 20 years, brother. I got DVDs from when I was a kid that are easily 20 years old and they're fine. Like there's no problem here. So if you're telling me Blu-ray discs are somehow like made out of paper and water or something, like I don't know what the heck even would only last 20 years that's a physical media, like if you just didn't burn it is like I think you're highly exaggerating or you don't understand the passage of time as well, but I understand what he's saying here. Another thing to point out is, hey, they can make your game stop working. I've never heard that. So what he may be referring to is they can shut servers off for games that you own. So for a game that is an online game, they can technically shut off the servers and then that will prevent the game from working. And if it's a physical game, then I guess that's what he's referring to. But that's just a thing for every game, even if they are digital. So that has nothing to do with the argument around physical games. Obviously, we do know that mini games require internet just to install. That is 100% evident. In fact, even more evident for digital only games. You have to have an internet connection in order to install them or download them because that's how they literally work. So again, not really a great argument here for digital. Then we have Mr. Footy, who claims that your account can be terminated after 18 months of inactivity, which is something that I heard bandied about a lot. A lot of people were trying to bring this up as a point. This is, by the way, only something that is effective in the EU. So this is an EU law that causes, this is a thing, all right? Let's go ahead and say that. This is a thing, and it is only effective in the EU. This has been a policy for years that was implemented by the government. So it was not Sony that was like, we're going to shut down your account after 18 months of inactivity. That was the UK or the EU government that did that. So Sony had nothing to do with that. Sony doesn't want to shut down your account. They don't want to make things difficult for you to buy things and interact with their platform. They don't want that. So that's not entirely accurate, especially if you're anywhere outside of the EU. And then beyond that, it's like, well, Sony is required to email you at that 18-month period or try to contact you and say, hey, your account is like inactive and we're going to have to shut it down if you don't do anything with it. So we're going to give you 6 more months to try and get that figured out. So it's really not 18, it's 18 plus 6. So, it's you have a good amount of leeway here, and if you're really not interacting with your console for 2 years, then I just don't know. I don't know when you're going to come back. But yeah, like still, it still sucks, but like in general, it's meant to be like an anti-hacking thing. Like an inactive account is just far more susceptible to somebody hacking it, because if you're not using it and somebody gets into it, then hey, you're probably not going to notice because you're not trying to get in it every day and notice that your, credit card information is gone or something like that. So, it makes sense from a security standpoint. It's unfortunate for the consumer, but it makes sense. And it's, again, not Sony's call. So I kind of consider that a little bit of a misleading statement here. And then Mr. Deathwatch, he brings up something that I actually did want to dive into, but didn't have the time to do the research on last episode. So he specifically points to the Insomniac leaks, which is where the conversation truly will begin for the PlayStation physical disc conversation we're going to be having this episode. So if you aren't familiar, the Insomniac leaks happened in 2022, 2023, something like that. We got the info around 2025. Insomniac was hacked. Hackers asked them to pay up a ransom, and Insomniac did the objectively correct thing and did not pay up. They said, okay, whatever you got it. Good for you. We're not going to pay you. So these hackers released that information. This information gave us probably the closest inside information we've ever seen to what actually is going on behind the scenes at Sony, including what Insomniac's game schedule and the release schedule looks like for the next decade and a half, which we're not going to get into here. If you really want to go find that, you can. Just know that they're having a Ratchet and Clank game in development. It's going to be out in a decade and a half, something crazy, a very, very long time. They're working on Wolverine, bunch of other. Basically, they're a Marvel studio. Spider-Man, Venom. I think there was an X-Men game in there as well, a general X-Men game, not just Wolverine. So there's a lot that they're doing. They're pretty much just a Marvel studio at this point, though. But what they did include was a bunch of SKUs for how games are selling on the PlayStation system. Specifically, their games, how many units they've sold, and the splits between digital and physical sales, which is very relevant to our conversation here. Because another thing I hear people bandy around a lot, and I had to do the research on this because I thought this was a little odd, is PlayStation claims that 80% of its sales are digital. Only 20% are physical. And believe it or not, I've heard many different variations on this. I've heard people say 85-15. I've heard people say 90-10. And it really can vary depending on what you're hearing. According to Sony directly, the last time they spoke on this, around 80% of its sales are digital. So the vast majority, the lion's share. But 20% is still a sizable amount. Now, what people started throwing out there, because they were a little upset about this whole physical thing going away, is they said, hey. We looked at the info. This includes digital-only games. Oh, frick. So what essentially this means is the SKU is probably a little off. I think some people would look at this and say, well, obviously that's what, yeah, duh. They said sales. games that are digital are also considered sales. So that's understandable, right? So I think anybody who combats that or says that to combat this statement is missing the forest for the trees. So what I ultimately think is are 80% of Sony's sales digital? It's hard to say. So it depends where you look. So what I think is 80% is likely accurate. And this is somebody who's a physical supporter. I don't like that. I don't love hearing that 80% of games are sold digitally. That's unfortunate. For me, as somebody who likes physical still being around, and you may be saying, Henry, well, I heard that single player games are a higher percentage and certain games here and there and X, Y, and Z are not actually an 80-20 split. It's way different. So that can't be accurate. We're getting into that, okay? There's a lot of info to sift through here, so bear with me, okay? I do agree that 80 is accurate. For what Sony is saying, it's accurate. But I do agree it's obviously misleading. It is skewing the data to make it seem like, hey, ain't nobody bothering with physical. Physical's for losers. You're a weirdo if you have a physical copy of a game. Obviously, what people are asking here when they say, or when they hear this, and you're saying, oh, we're choosing to take away the physical option, which is what Sony is doing, is you're hoping that they're presenting you with data for people who have the ability to choose between a physical and a digital game would choose 80% of the time to buy it digitally. That's what you're assuming when Sony's saying, look, our customer base has spoken. 80% of them only want digital games. 20% don't even, they're weirdos off in the corner looking at physical copies until the cows come home. They're just freaks. I get it, okay? But that is obviously a weird way of addressing removing physical copies completely if you're also including a bunch of games that obviously don't have a physical version. So obviously one of the better reviewed games of last year was Hollow Knight Silksong. You can't buy that physically. I think they're making a physical version of that game, so I can't use that example anymore. But you can think of 1,000,001 different games that are digital exclusive. They don't have physical copies, okay? So I get that. So obviously that's going to skew it. And then also, Sony has an entire skew of this console that is only digital. They are trying to push consumers. If you're a price-conscious consumer, you're probably going to get a PlayStation 5 that doesn't have a disc drive because it's $50 cheaper. So they're encouraging people to buy a SKU of a console that will force them to buy games digitally, which will also skew the data a little bit further into a digital-only purchasing model, right? So I think that this 80-20 percentage is a little misleading, okay? So you're saying, Henry, well, what the frick? Well, you just said it's still accurate. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, well, we're going to get into it. Your next thing is, let's go back to the Insomniac leaks. I love numbers. I'm a weird autistic freak, and I love statistics. I love math. So let's get into it. This is the Insomniac leak. Here are some sales. This is from 2022, the Insomniac leak. We have sales data for the physical versus digital percentage of sales. I want to emphasize the word percentage, not units. Percentage. We have Sackboy's Adventure, 77% physical. We have Ratchet and Clank A Rift Apart, 76% physical. We have Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut, 71% physical. Demon Souls Remake, 70% physical. Spider-Man Miles Morales, 66% physical. Returnal, 61% physical. Last of Us Part 2, 61% physical. And then, funny enough, MLB The Show, 39% physical. based on the research I've seen, any game that's kind of a more casual base or a game that most people are going to play religiously, like a Call of Duty or an MLB The Show or something like that, is probably going to be people are going to be incentivized to download it digitally because they're going to play it like every day. So they don't want to have to worry about having to get up and change a disc or something like that. They'd rather just have the ease of starting it up and, having it there in front of them. So, what we're seeing here, though, is a huge skew. This is crazy. Where are we even? How does the math even check out? When we're seeing 77% of a specific game is physical. How are we even coming close to an 80% overall percentage? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so this is all accurate information. Reminder, this is a percentage, not a unit, and this is from about 4 years ago. Okay? So this is a little old. The data is a little bit old, and it is also maybe telling us a different story than what we may think Sony is saying previously, right? So let's move on to today. All right. Alinea Analytics, which is a well-known analytics firm that specifically looks at video games. So they have a video game sector at the very least. I'm not too familiar with Alinea, other than the fact that I see their statistics bandied about every once in a while in the video game community. So they claim that on PlayStation 5, as of this year, 2026, digital games are now 80-20. There's an 80% digital purchase rate to a 20%. Well, you're saying, Henry, don't make no sense. What are you talking about? It's got to be, like single player games are more likely to be sold, like physically or something like that, right? Okay, let's go through the numbers. EA Sports, FC26. I didn't choose these games. These are just games that Alinea gives. 88% digital, 12% physical. Okay, it's a sports game. We already kind of established they're going to skew a little higher towards a more casual market or a more live service market that's going to want to open the game every day and therefore won't swap the disc. Okay, fine. So 88%, very high, obviously. Resident Evil Requiem. Okay. Single player game, more hardcore fan base. Really, Resident Evil's pretty casual. Let's be real. When you have like a movie franchise that has like 5 movies in it, I think you've reached mainstream success. All right. So Resident Evil, 72% digital, 27% physical. 007 First Light, another heavily single player focused game, 79% digital, 21% physical. Crimson Desert, another big single player only game, 80% digital, 19.9% physical. And then lastly, and this is the only thing that is anywhere close, Ghost of Yotei. Sony, and this is the one people want to bandy about a lot. Ghost of Yotei. It's a single player Sony first party game. 64% digital. Or really 65% digital. I'm rounding up. 64.6. So 35.4% digital. So let me read out those physical stats one more time for you. 12%, 28%, 21%, 20%, and 35%. Do you know what that kind of sounds like to me? Just ballpark math in my brain. If you could do those 5 numbers in your head real fast, you'd probably get something really close to 20%. Real close. It'd be pretty close to 20%. And that's including mostly single player games. Big AAA single player games, which are typically the ones that most analysts are going to say are better selling physically. Uh-oh. Okay. So let's look at, this is something that they bring up as well, Alinea. They say, okay, well, let's just compare a similar game from 4 years ago to today. Okay, so Ghost of Yote Director's Cut, which we were talking about just previously from the Insomniac leak, 71% physical. Well, we're now looking at 35% for its sequel, Ghost of Yote. That's less than half of the original sales physically. So there's been a 50% drop in physical purchasing of the exact same series over the course of 4 years. Now, admittedly, that is Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut, but that's the best comparison we have, right? So we're not going to say it's like apples to apples necessarily, but it's certainly not apples to oranges. So we're looking pretty close. It's a 50% drop. So when you start looking at, okay, well, the Insomniac leak shows that there's still certainly a market for physical games. When we start looking at, well, only over the course of 4 or 5 years, we've seen a massive decline in physical appetite, significantly. So, continuing on with this, you say, okay, that's not really enough. I need more. I've seen other stats bandied about that disagree with what you're saying. Well, let's talk about thegamebusiness.com. So, the Game Business is a video game business website. I follow them actually pretty closely. They've been doing a lot of really good interviews with some very high up people within the games industry. I'd certainly recommend go checking it out if you appreciate the business behind the video game industry. They interview, CEOs from EA, Microsoft, Take-Two, all sorts of big guys. So go check them out for sure. But they had an article 2 years ago, a while back, citing physical sales, and this is the most apples to apples we can get in 2023 only for games that had digital and physical copies available. So if you have a digital only release, you are not included in these stats. Okay, so that's like the closest we can get. So in 2023, this is only in Europe. All the stats I'm about to state are only in Europe, so it's not worldwide. But again, I think it's a good enough idea. So 55% of games sold on the PlayStation 5 were downloaded. Okay, 55%. That is still a pretty good amount, right? That's a lot. And that's only 3 years ago. In 2024, it jumped to 64%. Well, you're saying, Henry, that's still a lion's share away from 80%. Okay, we were told 80% by Sony. That was 2 years ago. 15, about a 10% jump, 9% jump year to year from 2023 to 2024. That's not looking good, all right? You give it another 2 years, let's say it doesn't even go that fast. It literally only has to go about 7%, 7-8%. So it doesn't even have to go as fast, and you're going to still hit that 80 mark pretty easily. So if the decline is steady, which it certainly seems, the more data I'm ingesting, the more I'm like, oh yeah, it's really a quick decline. It's not slow. It's pretty quick. 64% is kind of in line with it eventually gets to 80 in 2026. So still, let's continue on if you're not satisfied as of yet. So, there's something to notice. We're going to talk about Nintendo for a brief moment. So, they note that Nintendo Switch accounts for 80% of physical sales in Europe. So, if physical sales are down, it means that just Nintendo didn't have a good year, is essentially what that means. A lion's share of physical games are all Nintendo Switch copies. So 20% of the games that are typically sold physically are any other platform, which is pretty much just going to be Sony. Because let's be real, nobody's buying freaking Xbox games physically. If you are, I'm sorry. And nobody's freaking buying like PC games physically. If you are, I'm sorry. So like it's probably Sony games we're referring to here when we say the other 20%. So what Games Business says is, look, most of the time it really depends on the game type, which is kind of what I've been saying, right? And so they said specifically to kind of give an understanding, action shooters tend to do very well downloaded. So, for an example, Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 saw over 80% of its sales in the UK were digital. And then Helldivers 2, which is a Sony-owned IP, is over 90% digital, which totally makes sense to me. It totally makes sense. If that's a game that like I'm going to be jumping in and out of with friends, I would rather have it digitally because I know that I don't have to get up and change the disc, especially as like a single player gamer who plays games a lot, because like I know that if I am ever going to play a game that I want to play, like a single player game, then I'm going to have to get out and change the disc every single time. And if I'm going to play with a friend every week or every day or whatever the case is, I'd rather just have it digitally. So that makes total sense. I totally get that. So they then go on to say that single-player story-driven action games and family titles are a little bit different. So they are typically a little bit more physical focused. So given the examples, this is obviously from 2023, so the games given are a little bit older, but still relevant. 45% of Hogwarts Legacy sales. 49% of Assassin's Creed Mirage sales, 45% of Resident Evil Remake sales are physical. So that's still not a majority. None of those it's a majority. But it's certainly not enough to justify killing all of physical games. Absolutely not. Spider-Man 2, 54%. It's one of the two games they cite that actually had more physical. The other one being Astrobot, in which 55% and nearly 60% across all of Europe was physical. Okay? So, you're saying, okay, Henry, well, that's a majority. Okay, that's a majority. What are you doing? Come on. I mean, there's nothing else to see here. Close the case closed. Case closed. There's no other reason to go any further, okay? Here's the linchpin to all of it. All right? We've said a lot of numbers. I've bored you out of your mind. Did you feel like I just freaking lectured you for 15 years? Okay? I get it. The entire point, the bullet point that I think needs to be emphasized significantly is that in total, altogether, physical sales were down. The number of physical units year to year, all in all, were down. So we're not including games that have digital-only releases. I've already said that within this at the top of this article. I said we're not including digital-only games. So physical-only titles or physical and digital options are the only ones available. Digital-only games, their sales, something like a Call of Duty, a Fortnite, like a freaking PUBG, whatever the frick you want to say. These games are not included. The sales from these games, the add-ons, I mean, like none of that has really been included up to this point anyway, because they're free to play and their particular types of transactions are considered add-on. But in general, we're not including any of that stuff. So digital sales in general continued to rise, while physical sales continued to fall. So this also is in conjunction with many reports that we have seen a 50% decline in the past 4 years, actually, is what most reports claim. 50% decline in physical sales overall in the past 4 years. That almost, if you remember, coincides with the Ghost of Yotei and Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut percentages. We lost 50% in 4 years from the Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut to Ghost of Yotei in physical sales. So, what does this all mean? I will tell you, friend. It means ultimately we have a stat, 80%, that is misleading. It is most likely, okay? It certainly seems that way to me. You can spin it in any way you want. If you're spinning it 80-20, you're really you could probably make it sound a little bit better if you really wanted to, okay? Obviously, we should be including like just games that have a physical and digital split. If that's how we're really going to have this conversation, I think that's how that should be represented. Okay? Sony didn't do that. Sony said including all full digital sales, which I think is a little misleading, okay? However, this is still probably somewhat accurate. Even that, going over all the data I have, everything I've seen, I'm still seeing this year, 2026, based on the Alinea data, I'm seeing pretty much a 20-80 split. I'm seeing physical sales declining 50% over the past 4 years, where we used to have a 75%, now we have a 35% or something like that in the exact same series, same franchise, all that good stuff. So it seems like to me, all of the data we have is kind of coalescing into 80% is honestly pretty close to where we're at. You could probably represent it in a little bit more of a positive light. You could probably make it seem a little bit better if you wanted to, but Sony obviously has no incentive to do that. They do not have an incentive to do that. They want to make it seem like they are fully justified in killing off physical titles because Sony will get a bigger cut of every physical game or of every digital game. Right? So if you aren't familiar, and I say this all the time, Sony, if they are selling a game in the store, they have to give a 15% to the developer, and they have to give 15% to the store. So Walmart will get 15% of that sale. If they sell it digitally, Sony only has to give 15% to the publisher or 30% to the publisher. So Sony gets a bigger cut if they sell only digitally. That's just how the math checks out. So killing off physical, they are cutting out somebody who they have to give a percentage at all to, and Sony walks home with a bigger chunk of the pie, and like they're happy. So they have no reason to try and represent this data in any way other than physical sales suck balls. And you shouldn't, but we are fully justified, and nobody likes these things, and if you do, you're a weirdo. Like, that's exactly what they want to say, and that's exactly what they should say, because that's what supports their bottom line, okay? That makes total sense to me, okay? So, now that we've gone through all of that, I think a lot of people are angry over something that is inevitable, that I think the vast majority of consumers have dictated, including probably most gamers, let's be real, have decided this is how we prefer getting our media. And I do think that there are some elements of this that probably do not play into it very well. So, like secondhand sales, for instance, are not included on this at all for physical. So I don't know how many people will end up playing a game secondhand. I play a lot of games secondhand, actually. I buy a lot of my games used through GameStop, and because I can get them way cheaper. And for me, that sale is obviously not going to be included as a physical sale because Sony has no data on that. Only data somebody's going to have on that is freaking GameStop. Or if I bought a game on Facebook Marketplace for 50% off or whatever the frick, somebody just trying to get rid of a game. Sony's certainly not going to have data on that. So that probably skews a little bit more towards physical. But ultimately, the data shows me people are more than willing to buy games digitally, and we are a minority here. I still think that 20% is a massive amount of consumers that you're willing to just completely cut out if you, for some reason, feel the need to do so. But, like, in general, I think that's Sony's call. And if they think that they're going to be making more money off of people that way, that's fine. I think it's up to us as consumers to prove that they are wrong. I think it's very stupid of Sony to do this. So that leads me to what I really wanted to correct the record on, which from my previous conversation, I felt very defeatist. I was like, okay, Sony gets to do whatever the frick they want. You just speak with your wallet, do whatever the frick you feel like doing. I think that that's probably a little bit of a nihilist view. And I think that there are 2 points here. One is that Sony, obviously, this was just handled very poorly. This was handled very poorly. I mean, like, when you hear 80%, that is a very large number, right? And you say, oh, well, if Sony truly has 80% of a digital economy, killing 20% of it isn't that big of a deal. And then you start thinking about it, and you start thinking about, like, well, 1 in 5 people. That's actually a lot. Like, that's actually a whole heck of a lot. So I don't think Sony should feel very comfortable alienating 20% of its total user base. That just seems like an insane amount of people to piss off. And I think that 20% is still enough to probably keep digital going for, or excuse me, physical going for one more generation. It really does seem like, based on the data that we have, digital will easily have overcome and taken over, I don't know, maybe even 95% of the total sales of things by the end of the next generation. It just seems like it is a very quick death for physical at this point, but it still, 20% of an entire market is an insane amount of people to piss off. So Sony did a very poor job communicating this. They had a very short blog post on the PlayStation blog basically saying, hey, we're going to be stopping doing physical discs by 2028. Hope you're okay with that. And that was pretty much it. Sony really should have had a better conversation around this. They should have offered some kind of incentive. They should have been a lot more understanding that this was something that, yes, is really good for them, but is not very good for the people. Like, this really honestly kicks the people who are furthest down more, right? I feel like physical typically is a medium that is used for cost-concerned consumers. People who are looking for a better deal, people who are looking to sell their games when they're done with them, trade them in, rent them, perhaps. GameFly still exists if you're looking to rent. Won't exist for much longer, but it's still around today. So, those are people who I think I feel the worst for. And, technically that's me. And it's already in a point where physical is, or excuse me, in general, things are very expensive. The economy is very expensive in general. So it's hard to justify, oh yeah, there goes one way I was saving a couple of bucks every once in a while for something that I enjoyed. That sucks balls. So I think that that's very frustrating. What Sony could have easily done was come out and say, hey, okay, we maybe have a few concessions here, all right? We have some things to help ease your pain, all right? So something that easily comes across as a potential solution here is what every other physical media for entertainment has done, which is make a physical copy a more boutique thing, a higher priced alternative for those who still seek it. So obviously the first thing that pops into my brain is vinyl, music players, big old round CD things that you pop on that your grandma used to listen to. Those guys, they've recently resurged in popularity. A bunch of hipsters felt like they wanted to listen to their grandma's frickin' Elvis soundtrack or whatever the frick, and they brought them back into popularity, okay? That is for music people. You get your vinyl. You still have access to a Blu-ray, DVD, movie, whatever the case is. That still exists if you feel the need to do it. You could obviously buy it digitally for a fraction of the price or wait until it comes to a streaming service for even less. But you still have an option to buy a physical version of a movie if you so choose. Sony's saying you don't even have a freaking choice. We're just never making these things. Anything on PlayStation 6, it's digital. Get used to it, bucko. And what they could have easily said was, hey, maybe we're going to increase the price of physical copies. I think that's an easy ask. I think, in general, physical copies obviously cost more than a digital copy. A digital copy, you're literally just downloading an executable from the internet. But for a physical copy, they got to ship it somewhere. They got to make it. They have to put resources and stuff into a factory to make these things. There's a lot more costs that go into it, but ultimately I can buy a physical copy and a digital copy for the exact same price on launch day. It's never made any sense. I've always assumed that digital copies should just be cheaper than a physical copy. So ultimately, the digital users are subsidizing physical copies. They should really be more expensive. So I could understand Sony coming out and saying, hey, look, if you want a physical copy, that's cool. we still have an option for you. We'll build you a disk drive that you can pay $150 for or whatever the frick, and you can pop into your PlayStation 6, and then you can play all your old games, and you can play boutique physical games for the few games that still want to produce a physical copy, and those copies will probably be more expensive. They'll be your collector's edition. They'll be, your limited run games version that's more expensive than buying it digitally, but you get your physical copy. And I think at that point, I'd be like, okay, well, the option is still there. I still have backwards compatibility. My physical collection isn't necessarily obsolete and totally dead. And I still have an option that ultimately is fair. I think that's fair, genuinely. And they didn't do that. So another thing they could do is say, well, we'll transfer all the games you have physically. If you have a disc, pop it into your PlayStation, and you'll get a digital copy of that game. So you'll never have to worry about that. Your entire library will be digital. This is something that Microsoft is rumored to be doing, and something that Microsoft has even done in the past. So it's totally possible. Now, it would require a lot of hoops for Sony to jump through. They'd have to deal with licensing for people and giving away essentially another copy of the game. But in general, I think it still could easily be done. Easily. So this is not something they did either. They could guarantee long-term access. This is, I think, a minimum, right? Guarantee long-term access to your media of any kind that you buy on a PlayStation console. Until Sony goes bankrupt and the entire company can no longer function, you own this copy of a digital game. I think that's the obvious answer that people were looking for. Well, unfortunately, there were two other news stories that dropped the exact same day/week, which was, Sony removing a bunch of movies from your digital library that you already bought, and the PlayStation 3 and Vita store shutting down. So that narrative really doesn't fly, because that's not what happened to literally two other storefronts that Sony owns. Whoops. So I think the bare minimum thing that Sony could have even guaranteed people about an all-digital future, they honestly doubled down and look even worse. So the communication around this has seemed greedy. It seemed unnecessary. It seemed cold. And it seemed like they just do not give a frick. Like, frickin' sink or swim. You are with us or you're against us, mother effer. Like, that is just how this whole situation is. And you better get over it. And I think that is very frustrating for a lot of people, and I totally understand that. And in conjunction with that, I think the second big talking point behind this is something that now we have to understand. Physical is obviously on the way out. Look, Sony, of course, the first people to bite this bullet, but let's be real. Nintendo is eventually going to do this too. Microsoft is eventually going to do this too. PC is already pretty much a virtually only digital storefront. So this is just where the gaming industry is going. You will eventually have an all digital future. So be it, right? What needs to happen now is a conversation around digital rights. Okay, fine, Sony, you did it. You took our physical discs. I think this is the stance most people should accept now, is we are in a losing battle. Sony is not going to correct course. They are not going to turn around. They're not going to say, okay, fine, PS6 has a disk drive now. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. They've already basically repurposed the factory that could have even made that a thing in the first place. I think Sony wants the money that's going to come from killing physical, and it just simply helps their business monetarily in so many different ways. The problem is now we as consumers are looking at, oh, well, frick, our digital rights really kind of suck. Like, we don't own a copy. We've already discussed on the podcast. You are in a license agreement. So you don't actually own anything. They can technically take it away from you at any time. We obviously need to fight for ownership over our digital goods. It should not be a license anymore. The ability to trade and sell games. Oh, well, you can't do that. It's not possible. Bro, what the frick do you think an NFT is? And I know that's like a dirty word. People don't like hearing NFT. All right, I know a bunch of freaking Ponzi scheme grifter like scumbags ruined NFTs for everyone. I get it. But it is actually a valuable technology, okay? NFT is basically just digital ownership. You can buy and sell a digital good. That's all that means. So, why not have that in some way, shape, or form for digital games? I think it's an incredibly valuable technical asset. We can do that now. So let's do that. We need the ability to sell and trade games. I think at a minimum, we need a decent refund policy on Sony. That is, I think, number 3 is on Steam right now. You can refund a game within 2 hours of playing it. If the game's broken, if it sucks, if it's not what you thought, then you can return it and get your full money back, no questions asked. Great. That's perfect, right? I think that's fair. I think that's a fair thing. Not so at Sony. There are some games in which if you even download it, you cannot get your money back. That's just not acceptable. We need better rights as consumers on a platform that is locking us in to all of these things, and we have no other options. I think digital future is not necessarily a horrible one, but we have to fight for better rights. That's where we really should be moving this conversation. I think people being like, "Oh, well, we have to steer Sony back. We got to steer Sony. Physical is really where it is." I feel like most of the points I am hearing around physical ownership are misinformed. They are emotional, and I get it. I was very emotional when I first heard the news too, that a form of media that I have grown up with, that I have associated, I have a collection of on my wall, like it's heart-wrenching, it's gut-wrenching. I mean, it sucks, right? But it is just simply a product of the time. I'm sure somebody cried when vinyls were lame. When they were like, "Oh, we're moving to CDs, these compact discs." Oh, well, F me. I only like vinyl. Vinyl's the only thing for me. And it's like, oh, well, then you're just never listening to music again until, I don't know, 30 years later when vinyls are now a thing again. But, like, in general, like, technology expands, it changes, and some things become obsolete. And in this case, physical games have become obsolete. Or if you honestly want to make the argument they are not yet, they certainly will be in the next several years. They will, they're already a vast majority. I think 80% is a vast majority. But I think, when we get to 90%, which is inevitable, I think, based on the trends we're seeing, if we think 90% is that at that point, do we cut the cord? Do we pull the plug? 95? Oh, I don't know. Like, is it really worth Sony making a console with a disk drive at all to support 5% of their ecosystem? Maybe. But I think it is eventually going to get to a point where it's like, well, it's really just 1%. And it's pretty bold, I think, to say that 1% of the entire ecosystem deserves to be catered to so heavily and have an entire, resource like that is like allocated to them. I think that's a little bold. So eventually we're going to get there. So I think that you do need to start shifting your sights. Your sights need to be on digital rights. I think, sure, if you want to fight for physical too, I'm here for you, buddy. I'm here for you. I'm here for I will be on the front lines. Let's do it. Get Sony to bring back physical for one more generation, or to give me more of a boutique option or something like that. I'm about it. But I think that you really need to add digital rights into your repertoire of fighting orders, of marching orders. You really need to make that the primary focus. I think that will be a better long-term fight. It'll be a better long-term goal, and I think it's what needs to happen. And I think we're just nowhere near digital rights being anywhere near sufficient at the moment. So we need to try to make that a reality. But in general, that's what I wanted to say about that. I feel like I didn't get to say most of that last episode. I was too much in a depressed soup. We're only an hour in. Only an hour into the podcast. That was a whole freaking hour of me babbling about that. Good stuff. I hope you enjoyed. Hopefully it was a good rage bait content. Everybody was all riled up and pissed off. It just takes a long time to debunk things, dude. It takes so long to debunk things. We're going to get into that in a minute with this Microsoft layoff news as well, but like it's really easy for someone to just say like a lie. And then like you have to find resources to back it up and be like, "No, that's a lie." It's like, "Well, prove it." It's like, "Okay, well, let me find the reports and the statistics and compile the data and build a story out of the data." It's like, "Holy frick." It's really just easier to say, I buy physical games, so there's no way that physical games are dead yet. Holy frick. Anyway, that was the comment corner. Inevitably the longest comment corner I've ever had and will ever have. Thank you for sticking through that. So, now on to the news. That's right, we finally done it. We finally made it to the news segment. This, like I said, news has been light. Because really, what the frick else are you going to talk about other than the horrifically depressing stuff that happened? So let's go back and talk about that, shall we? So really, no news came out this week, but the prior week, we got more info on the layoffs occurring at Microsoft. So, id, the makers of Doom and Quake and all of your favorite action shooters, they are being let go. A lot of them. A good portion of the studio, 136 people, have been let go at id Studios. So, from VGC is where I'm sourcing my information. They had 185 people before the cuts, and that means we're down to just 49 people at id. That is pretty freaking crazy. Now, we're going to delve into that number in just a second, but in general, that's the number that's being bandied around a lot right now. So, they have apparently been reported to being, quote, relegated to support studio size status, which this is coming from a very disgruntled employee, that quote of they are now like a support studio, and I do not think it is an accurate statement either. Obviously, tensions are very high with this news, okay? I want to just preface with that. Like, it is an incredibly important and historical studio. It's one of the oldest studios ever in the gaming industry. Obviously created Doom. You know, that thing that can run on your freaking TI-85 calculator? That is the people who they made that. They made id Tech, their engine. So they are a historically very talented studio in many, many different ways. And it's kind of a shame to see anything happen to the studio at all, right? But there's also a lot of emotions around that, and it's understandably so because it's a very important studio, right? Totally understandable. But in this case, if you read the interview from the person who said they've been relegated to support size, you will clearly see that this person is incredibly upset. And it's understandable. I'm not saying that that's wrong. But he's clearly like, this is the worst thing. They nuked, they gutted were his exact quotes. They gutted the studio. They nuked it to oblivion. And he curses out Microsoft, says that they're horrible, and I totally get it, and in all honesty, kind of agree. But it's very obvious that this guy is not looking at this from a very objective standpoint. And I get it. Like, I've lost a job before too, and you do not think straight. You're not very happy. You are very upset when that happens. So like, I totally freaking get it. Okay? But in this instance, it does not seem to be the case. So people were bandying about, oh, well, they're just going to be this COD support studio now. There's no people that are going to work on the Unreal, or they're not going to work on anything on the id Tech engine anymore. So people are believing their support studio and that they're moving all of their games to Unreal Engine, and they're abandoning id Tech, which is their internal engine that they make. So we have a combatant to that comes in and tries to defute that, but we'll get to that in a minute. Currently, we have Tom Warren, who is a very well respected game journalist, and he comes out and he actually says they're currently working on the next Doom game. So they're not even a support studio at the moment. They're currently working on another full game. So that's already kind of been refuted by Tom Warren. They aren't a support studio as of yet. They're still very much a studio capable of making a game on their own. So a fun little tidbit that came out was the reason that they were kind of sized down was because they were between projects, which is pretty understandable. Not really understandable. Understandable makes it sound like I would have done the same thing. Understandable in a sense that Microsoft has done that before. Specifically, Tango Gameworks is the first studio that comes to mind when I hear about that. They had just finished Hi-Fi Rush, which was a very critically renowned game, but because they had just finished it and Microsoft was looking to lay off and cut heads, they just went for them because they knew it was going to be a long time before they got anything else out of that goose that was going to produce for them. It was going to be years before their next game was done, so they were just an easy studio to cull. So because they had just finished up the DLC for Doom: The Dark Ages, they had finished that project entirely, they were cut. And that's why. So it kind of goes in line with what Microsoft had already done for previous layoffs. That and the more fun things is that they had pitched several games prior to being cut down. So the games that they had pitched included a John Wick style sci-fi shooter. Sounds pretty cool. A new Perfect Dark game. And a Western style robot game with survival mechanics. But Asha specifically had basically shot all of these down because, and this continues to be a very bold point thing for her, is they only want to focus on the big IP moving forward. So they don't want these like, oh, this is a new IP. Well, we can't guarantee a new IP is going to sell, id. So we got to make sure that if you're producing a game, it better be from the franchise that we know are going to sell, that we know people want. So they shut down all those. And you say, oh, well, Perfect Dark. Well, okay, like, let's be freaking real. Let's be real. Is Perfect Dark really a freaking franchise that people would flock to when it came back? I don't think 90% of people playing games now even have played a Perfect Dark game, yet alone know what it is. So I think that's like kind of understandable that was shot down as not being a new major, tentpole IP. So that's, I think, just fun facts, really. I think it was worth mentioning. But obviously everybody's pissed off. You have this legendary developer that's being targeted by these layoffs, which is effed up, and nobody wants to see that. Well, what does John Carmack, one of the co-founders, one of the legendary co-founders, really, of id have to say about this? John Carmack, one of the obviously co-founders of id, and eventually went off to work on Oculus, which was then bought by Meta, and now he's working at his own AI company. But he's a very technical guy, very, very rational engineer guy. But this is from VGC. I have some choice quotes for him. He is a little bit less emotional, which kind of makes sense. If you even even thought about what I just described his background is, you'd probably think, oh, well, this guy probably is a very, very rational dude, very computer sciencey, right? So here's what he has to say, and I'm going to read you off a few quotes because I think they're all important, okay? So this is all from VGC. He says, quote, "I'm saddened, but I can't muster anger or outrage over it. I don't have access to the books, but I suspect that id Software was a marginal business from Microsoft's perspective. I believe the reports that Minecraft revenues have been carrying several other studios, referring to a claim that Bloomberg has made in a previous article. To continue being produced long term, games need to succeed, not just be beloved. Games are competing with every other option in spending your leisure time and money, and the competition is brutal." He said that he couldn't rule out the possibility that executives are idiots, but added that he felt it shouldn't be your default belief. He added, quote, I don't think that there's any obvious path that would have doubled the revenue from id Games. Could they have gotten more from a different pricing strategy? Could they have created more things for fans to buy? Could they have had cost-effective marketing in a way that reached more players that would have loved and bought the games? Could they have changed the game designs to have broadened the appeal for more players and altering existing ones? Could they have produced the games at lower cost, faster, or cheaper? I really don't know. The game isn't over yet, and I hope the studio rallies through. This is, I think, an incredibly fair take. Like, I think most gamers aren't looking at it like this right now, but I also think a lot of people look at what Microsoft is doing. I've heard a lot of people in the gaming industry be like, yeah, I get it. I understand why Microsoft is laying off a bunch of people, you know? And it makes total sense to them that Microsoft was flailing. It's not doing very well. It needs a reset. It sucks that everybody's losing their freaking jobs. Don't even think otherwise. Like, that is horrible. But these studios were not producing games. They were not producing games that sold. They were not producing games that people wanted to buy Game Pass for or that they wanted to buy an Xbox for. So when you look at Doom, the Dark Ages probably didn't do as well as most people would assume a Doom game would do, because in general, I think Doom the Dark Ages was met with kind of lukewarm reception. Like, people were like, yeah, it's another Doom game. You know, some people liked it, some people didn't. I didn't get very far in Doom the Dark Ages. It seemed like another Doom game. They changed some things. I didn't know if I was going to love it or hate it. A lot of people seemed kind of all over the place about it, so I was like, I think I've had enough Doom. I'll just go somewhere else, you know? I got plenty of other games to play. If people are pretty meh on this, I really don't need to get sweaty with Doom over here. So when you look at this, you really do need to ask the questions that John Carmack is asking, because that's the questions that Asha Sharma is going to ask. How much of the profits for Xbox come from Doom, come from id? And I think the answer is going to be probably not a lot. Probably the vast majority come from Blizzard, Activision, you know, Bethesda. Something like an Elder Scrolls would probably sell very, very well. I don't think Doom is going to be some tentpole franchise. It is for gamers. Obviously, Doom is a legendary game. Everybody knows Doom. Everybody loves Doom. But I don't think everyone is sitting here saying, well, my mom knows what Doom is. Like, my mom knows what Skyrim is. You know, she's heard of that. My mom knows what Call of Duty is. She knows what Candy Crush is, which Microsoft owns. I think we all forget. She knows what Minecraft is. Those are games that sell millions and millions and millions and millions of units, do billions in revenue. And I just simply don't think that Doom is doing that, which is really unfortunate, right? So it makes sense to probably look at something like an id, even though as a gamer, we all look at that and say, you can't touch id. That's a legend. That's a legendary place. You cannot do anything to them. From a strictly cold, hard business perspective, you have to ask those questions and say, well, what could have really made Doom more successful? If it isn't successful enough, what could have made it more successful? And there's really probably not a great way to answer that question. So I think then people start looking at this and they start looking at the numbers we have. We have 185 previously at the studio, cut down by 136. You're down to about 50 people, just about. Okay, so people are like, this studio has been gutted. There is nothing left of this studio. Well, id Software actually comes out to make a statement on the matter. Isn't that wonderful? And they say, hey, it's actually not that bad, guys. It's actually not that bad. And they claim that they actually still have as many people as they did when they made Doom 2016, which obviously was, I think, that's my favorite Doom game, personally. So, still have enough to make a very solid game. Like, one of the best first-person shooters ever, in my opinion. So, why is this a huge deal? Well, for one, saying it's not that big of a deal, trying to downplay it at all is kind of silly. And then 2, it just doesn't pass the smell test. Like, okay, well, why did you laid off so many people? And then we have reports saying that, well, you laid off 3/4 of your staff. So that can't be right. Well, here's the thing. So this is a number. This is VGC actually reported this. Well, VGC sources an article that sources another article. So I dug all the way through it, and there is at no point they never reference 185 as the number of people working at id. In fact, Doom the Dark Ages has about 260 to 270 employees working at id at the time of its release. Specifically, they're all in the credits. And it's even easier to understand how many people are in like id, because they specifically separate out, because you could say, oh, well, what about contractors and vendors and all that other stuff? They help work on these things. They specifically identify who works at id in the credits. So 260, 270 employees around that working on Doom the Dark Ages. Well, then they lay off 139 people. You're back to probably around the same number of employees you had at Doom 2016, which is following the line of logic that Microsoft and /id is saying is accurate. So I think that the number we're getting of 185 is just simply not accurate. This is coming from a union website. It's being cited from a union website, but the union website itself actually never states that number. So I don't know why we're ever citing that number as the number of employees that work at id. So like in general, I don't think that number makes sense, and I'm more inclined to believe Microsoft, in all honesty, based on just the people that are in the credits, like for Doom the Dark Ages. Like that's proof in the pudding right there, right? So I think, one, we have some negative reporting or some false reporting that's going around for that, if I had to guess. I haven't done my due diligence other than just looking through the articles and the sources and seeing that I don't know where the heck we're getting this information. But maybe I'm retarded. I don't know. So, or stupid. We're not going to say that other word. But maybe we're stupid. But in general, I don't know. But I feel like I believe Microsoft. They're not going to lie. They may try to spin it, and I think it is still weird to be like, hey, guys, yeah, we just laid off like 50% of our staff, but it's not that big of a deal. Don't worry. Like, I think that's a little weird to come out and say that, to be frank. But in general, I think people are looking to crucify Microsoft for what they've done. I think it's a very emotional response to id being torched like this. So, and I, again, understand it, but I think we do need to be, it's just like physical discs. It's like we need to be objective about this. Like, yeah, it's messed up. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, but like there's reasons behind this. And I think we need to stop trying to find reasons otherwise that supports our bias and like just gets us all riled up, you know? I think that's kind of what we need to do, all right? So, continuing on, Xbox then cuts 52 people from Obsidian. You know, the guys who made Avowed, Outer Worlds 2, all those things. Grounded, per se. That's about a quarter of that studio's staff. So they then come out and say that they have canceled Avowed 2 and that the studio is now working on a new Fallout game, which, hey, you know, take the good with the bad, I guess. We finally got Obsidian to get working on a Fallout game. Avowed seemed like nobody was really clamoring for another one. I hear a lot of people say who played it, oh, yeah, it's actually pretty good. Like, yeah, it's an 8 out of 10, but it's also actually pretty freaking good. And that's great, but I don't think it set the world on fire. And so I think I have access to it on Game Pass, and I've just never felt the need to try it. I also wasn't very into the Outer Worlds 1, so I didn't feel the need to get into a game that was probably going to be the very similar thing, just fantasy. So, continuing on, they laid off 213 people from ZeniMax Studios, or Elder Scrolls Online, which is about half of what was left of that studio. The reason I say left of that studio is because that studio was already hit by massive layoffs last year after they also canceled their new game Project Blackbird, which most people seem to think was turning out pretty well. After this, Bethesda proper came out, and they were like, hey, we just wanted to let everybody know we're working on Fallout 5. Isn't that cool? You should be really excited for that. And just to confirm, we are working on a Fallout New Vegas remake and a Fallout 3 remake, and Elder Scrolls 6 is still in development. And so, like, that's kind of what you want to hear, right? But it also feels like an ill-timed statement because, we just lost like half of the studios that were making these games, and I don't know. It really does feel like this is another step in like, yeah, we're only focusing on the major IP. We only want to focus on the things that are going to sell well. We know that those things are going to sell well, and they just did the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion remake, and I'm sure that did very well for them, if I had to guess, and wasn't that big of a commitment. So, hey, yeah, make another Fallout remake, make another Fallout New Vegas remake. I mean, by all means, I think I'll buy it. I will 100% buy it. I have very fond memories of those games, so I'll certainly go back and play those games again. I don't mind. And Fallout 5, adoy. Of course you're going to make another Fallout game. I wasn't born yesterday. Of course. I think Microsoft is super frustrated that you haven't made one in a long time. Let's be real. I think the Fallout series is popping off right now. People want more Fallout. They're dying for more Fallout, especially since the TV show. And Microsoft has no games to capitalize on that momentum. At least Sony can do that. They can make a Last of Us game come out around the same time as the TV show, even if it's just a remake. Just capitalize off the IP. Just being hot. People watching the show, they're talking about it. They want some reason to go back and play the games, getting more immersed in that world. It makes sense. So I think this is an obvious thing. It's a fan favorite thing that people are going to be happy about. But again, it just comes in the middle of this horrific fog. Like, what the frick? No way to be happy about what's going on over there. You can't really think of anything Microsoft is doing right now and not be like, ugh. Really kind of sucks to be over at Microsoft. Frick. Something I also want to mention here is that Obsidian has made 3 games in the past year for Microsoft. Grounded 2, Avowed, and The Outer Worlds 2. Grounded 2 was the only success, admittedly. The other 2 missed their sales expectations by a significant amount. That being said, it's very fun to think about the fact that this team was punished for actually making games for Microsoft. Not only that, but making games that people actually liked. You look over at Undead Labs. Undead Labs has been released. They're like Undead Labs. By the way, Undead Labs is the people who make State of Decay, which, by the way, has made 0, a big fat goose egg of games for Microsoft. They have released 0 titles under the Xbox banner. And they said, you can have your IP, you can let somebody else buy you, you're somebody else's problem, we do not give a frick about you anymore. And they let them free, but they said, Obsidian, come here. We have to have a talk. A quarter of your staff is dead to us because your IP is too valuable. You are a studio that we actually want to keep. You produce games, and you produce games that make us money as well. We have to keep you around. That's kind of effed up, right? You really just you have to feel for the studios that actually did their jobs at Microsoft, because they just don't seem to be being very well rewarded for that. The people who really didn't make good games and didn't make games that sold, those guys are being let free. They don't have to deal with this mess anymore. And with the final cherry on top of the news, Asha Sharma was named advisor to the Federal Reserve on jobs and productivity. Now, this isn't a very big news story, at least in my eyes. Obviously, she's going to have major impact on policy within the United States government. But in this case, she was more or less brought in just to show or advise on AI and how the job force could keep employment high in regards to AI. Obviously, this is just insult to injury, considering she is responsible for letting hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs go within the past several weeks. And it will continue to do so over the next several months. So it's just utterly ironic. It's not exactly anything worth noting other than just, wow. You just really can't catch a break over at Microsoft unless you're an executive. Am I right? But that will wrap it, I think, for the news this week. Like I said, not a lot going on. Most of it just covering, in fact, all of it just covering Xbox. Few smaller things here and there, but nothing really worth mentioning in my eyes. And so, we move on to the final segment, which is impressions. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. And this final impressions, it's a game I've been working on for quite some time. It's Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. And in conjunction with that, the Future Connections expansion, which comes along with the Definitive Edition. Now, this is an interesting one because I have had Xenoblade. I have Xenoblade 1, 2, 3, and X all on my shelf. I'm looking at them right now. Got them on a buy two get one free sale at GameStop probably a year and a half ago or something like that. It's been a minute. But I heard when 3 came out, people were like, oh, this is the best JRPG series of all time. Not only that, but when you play all 3 of them, it's life-changing. It's one of the best moments of my gaming career. I can't believe I was lucky enough to have experienced the Xenoblade saga. Oh my gosh. And I was like, okay, well, I would love to experience that at some point, but these are 60-hour JRPGs that, Xenoblade 1 came out, on the Wii. So it's not like it's a pressing game within the zeitgeist for me to really get around to. However, Nintendo changed that when they recently announced that Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3 will all be getting Switch 2 upgrades. And in that case, there's some quality of life that comes along with these upgrades. Obviously, you get your 4K resolution upgrade, your 60 frames per second, your typical. But in this case, you also get voice dialogue for all affinity sequences, which is essentially like your teammate chatter that you can kind of trigger as you go through the story. You get a vehicle that you can now ride through areas in, which I actually found to be an incredibly good quality of life improvement. And then you also get some new outfits for your party as well. That's pretty much the basic understanding of this. For $10, I found it to be a good enough incentive to drop the money for, and so I did. And I actually had a few friends that did as well, but they only played like the first 5 minutes of the game and then bounced. Me, I am a committed man. I play games and I finish them, by golly. And especially a game that I think is as in high regard as Xenoblade. Xenoblade on the Wii, the original release of this game, is a 92 on Metacritic. I didn't even realize this game reviewed that well. I know that Xenoblade 2 is a little bit more mixed. People seem to be a little bit more divisive on that game. I see a lot more people say, like, this is my favorite game of all time, but I also see a lot more people be like, this game is utter garbage, and I can't believe the people who made Xenoblade made this. And so I'm very interested to get to that one eventually, but I know Xenoblade 3 is like an 89, so this is still the most highly rated of the series, and I mean, I didn't even realize that while playing it. But in this case, I wanted to go back, I wanted to see, and I hopefully wanted to get through all 3 of them at some point, God knows when, but it is always such a commitment to go back to a 60-hour game, especially one that's so old. When I'm looking at my freaking shelf right now, I'm like, oh, dude, I got games that are so new and I paid money for, and I just need, they're a part of the zeitgeist right now. I want to be a part of the conversation, and then freaking gosh darn, now I have to play a 60-hour JRPG. Well, that's going to take me at least a month to get through, and it did. It took me about 2 weeks or 4 weeks to get through this game, about a 60-hour climb, including the expansion, which is pretty minor. We'll get to that at the end of the review, but I finally had a lull in my gaming calendar. There hasn't been that much that came out over the past month, which is typical for the summer season of gaming. And I was like, you know what? They just released the patch. Now is the time. I'm feeling it. I'm going to get into Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. Now, let me tell you about it, friend. Xenoblade, like I said, from a historic developer, Monolith, who's done Xenogears, basically anything with a Xeno in front of it, which are all very well regarded JRPGs from a long time ago, you'll recognize as Monolith Software. They went off to Nintendo. Nintendo actually acquired them, and they made Xenoblade, which the only real attachment I had to the Xenoblade franchise was I knew Shulk was a playable character in Super Smash Brothers. So that's all about it. I knew, and I knew Backslash, and that was about it. And now I feel very much more so familiarized with Backslash, and that is a backslash for those that are uninitiated, one of Shulk's main moves. But in this game, I'll just go ahead and start it from the top here and give you kind of a general idea of this is the most JRPG. I think it is honestly safe to say, and I'm not even exaggerating when I say this, Xenoblade Chronicles 1 is the most JRPG I've ever played in my entire life. If you think of anything good about a JRPG, if you think of anything bad about a JRPG, if you think of any tropes for a JRPG, it is in this game. And that I find it, I'm not going to say I find it surprising that this series is as highly regarded as it is, because I don't think so. I actually very much enjoyed this game, but I think I also was kind of primed to. So I am from a generation of PlayStation 2 JRPGs. That's kind of where I was raised on my RPGs. I hadn't really come around to the PlayStation yet, so I didn't have Final Fantasy VII or Chrono Trigger or anything like that in my repertoire growing up. So in this case, Xenoblade Chronicles is on the Wii. So it's very close to that era. And in that case, I feel like it has a lot of the same tropes and trappings that I would have gotten from a more nostalgic JRPG. So for me, I'm very well acquainted to an anime JRPG story. I'm well acquainted to, in general, the anime Japanesiness of the J per se of a JRPG. And I think that the story is excellent, but I think it has problems. I think that the cast is excellent, but it's not the best cast I've ever seen in a JRPG. I think that the combat is good, but it really depends on what you're freaking looking for in a JRPG because it is different. And I'll get into that in a second, but let's start with the story. Okay, I think in general, any JRPG, what you're looking for is a good three things. And it's something that I think is very difficult to get in most other games. And a lot of that has to do with the runtime of a JRPG, is they're typically much longer. But number one is a story. Number two is great characters. And number three is a great world. You want to really inhabit a world, a new place. You want to get to know characters, fall in love with them, and you want a story that keeps you hooked for a 60, 70, 80, 120, whatever hour JRPG. So those things are paramount. Combat in JRPGs has always been hit or miss. I've definitely played some JRPGs, like I think of Final Fantasy X as a JRPG with great combat. Really enjoyed the combat from start to finish, and it's turn-based, and I'm not typically a turn-based guy. But then I think of, other JRPGs that are less interesting with their turn-based combat or more stat-wise, more menu-wise. Really kind of becomes a turn-off for a lot of people, and I can understand that. So gameplay has never been the real reason I've ever been enthralled with the JRPG scene. It's always been kind of the world you're being put into. So in this one, the world is quite possibly one of the most memorable and one of the most interesting and one of the most standoutish worlds I've ever encountered in a JRPG. So get this, kids. This world takes place on two giant colossus that are both dead. They had a war. They had a big giant sword fight years and years and years ago, and they both died. And so now, flash forward, there are societies that have evolved on these titans, and that they are the only land masses in the world. So these worlds are divided between a Bionis and a Mechonis. The Mechonis is just filled with freaking robots, and the Bionis is filled with like more fantasy. It's like basically a sci-fi Titan and a fantasy Titan, and they both are like connected through these swords that basically stabbed each other through the freaking gut and killed them. And they are having a war with each other because they just are like, well, F that guy. I don't like them. And so Shulk finds this magical sword, and it's the only sword that can affect these robots and be a very effective tool in this war. This grants him the ability to see the future, and he goes on a revenge quest after his village gets burned down at the beginning of the story to go and seek revenge and settle this conflict once and for all. Now, being a good JRPG, there are many twists in this story. The world expands and develops over the course of the game in a ways that you really can't predict, but at the same time feel very satisfying when unveiled. It is a great time in general. It is a slow start. And again, this is typical JRPG nonsense. It is a slow start. It is a trope-filled start. Look, dude, I'm just gonna go ahead and spoil the game for you. The final boss battle is God. Okay, have you ever played a freaking JRPG before? You may be familiar with the final boss battle being God, because that's about 90% of, if you honestly, I would be rather interested to see a list of JRPGs where the final boss is not some form of God. In this case, you fight God, and at the beginning of the game, the inciting incident is your hometown is burned to the ground by an opposing force. Guess how many JRPGs start like that? Pretty much all of them. So like your story is very trope filled, but at the same time also filled in this incredibly interesting set and premise, and it's just filled with to the brim with all sorts of different interesting plot devices as you go. Not only that, but the characters are all great. Not all of them are like these massively important characters, but a lot of them are. At least even conceptually, if they are not a conceptually interesting character, they end up being your favorite. Like Ryan, like at the beginning of the game, I was like, this guy's not that important. He's kind of a loser, kind of meathead dude. By the end of the game, I was like, dang, Ryan is the heart of this. He is the heart of this crew, and you kind of get to know your party as you go, and you really enjoy getting to know them and seeing where they are in this world and how they fit in the story. You have a lot of party members that are actually big deals within the overall narrative and like major players. And like that's always a great thing to have in your JRPG party, are these really influential people within the world. Not only that, but the world itself is incredibly interesting. I'm not just talking about the story, I'm talking about the world. Like walking around. I was actually today, like this game is pretty old. Like I said, Wii. And I can only imagine playing this game on the Wii and being like, "Oh my gosh. This worlds, these areas, they're so detailed, they're so massive." It is an understatement to say how massive these worlds are in this game. It's kind of crazy thinking that this ran on the Wii, the original Wii. And I was genuinely pretty impressed by the size and scope of these areas and enjoyed going around them, looking around them, seeing, like looking up and seeing this giant Titan corpse above me. You kind of traverse throughout the Titans throughout the game. So you like start out at the feet and you move up to like the head. It's like it's a genuinely cool idea, and it's executed incredibly well. So let's be frank, the three things that I think are the most important things in any JRPG, they are all here. Great story, great characters, great world. Every single bit of it. I loved them all from beginning to end, and it's what really kept me going throughout this game. Now, let's get into everything else. I think the first thing you're going to notice is the combat. Okay, so combat I'm not going to say is great, but I'm not going to say is bad either. So what it is essentially, it's not turn-based, but it is an MMO style combat, which is not what I expected going into this. I expected something more action-focused, and normally JRPGs from this era go one of two ways. It's live action combat, something like a Kingdom Hearts, or it is turn-based. And in this case, you really kind of get neither. You get an MMO style combat, and that is something that you're going to have to either love or hate, I would think. It seems like most reviewers simply didn't mind it, but that's because I think it honestly is just kind of a mindless kind of combat system. So if you are unfamiliar, in a lot of MMOs, combat systems are typically macro based. So a macro is essentially you just have a list of commands that you can do, and you just click on a command, and then that the character will execute the command. So, and you can stack these commands and kind of order them. And it's very limited here within Xenoblade Chronicles. You're not like actually ordering them or stacking them in any meaningful way. You're really just kind of choosing which ones to do in real time combat. The only two things that you actually have any control over in the combat is positioning, so you can move your character around, and when to execute moves. That's literally it. So if you like the idea of combat being more so on autopilot and really only choosing the moves that you're doing when you're doing them, then, that may be something you're interested in. It may be not. In general, I found this combat to be serviceable. It is really more so a combat system that works in a JRPG than anywhere else, because or an MMO, obviously, because you're really just kind of mindlessly doing things. Like, this combat system is not meant to be in depth. Now, you technically like try to do strategy and, like, oh well, I'm gonna min max these characters and build a strategy for each party that I have. Yes, you can, but it's probably not what most people are going to do. You're going to stick to a certain party, you're going to have a certain set of moves, and you're really never going to experiment outside of that. And I don't think the game necessarily hates you for doing that, and like, it gives you incentive to do that only if you feel the need to, really. So combat for me was just kind of in the middle. Like, I wasn't like, oh, this is the best combat system I've ever seen in MMO or a JRPG. It's different from a lot of JRPGs, but it's not necessarily exciting. It didn't blow my socks off in any way. So combat's kind of middling. So then we get into like everything else, which is the typical trappings that you have with any JRPG. So like, if you're thinking grinding, I mean, like what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a JRPG? Grinding. Oh yeah, Xenoblade is going to force you to grind, which I hate grinding, is especially now. As a kid, sure, I'll grind for you. It's fun to grind. It's fun to have that progression. I don't mind it in most games, but I also don't like being forced to. It feels very forced when it's like, oh well, you really can't even beat this boss unless you are, level 85 or whatever the case is. If you're a level 70, then there's no freaking chance. Or even worse, if you're like a level 80, if you're only like 5 levels off, it's like, well then F you. You may need to go grind 5 levels and come back. Just fight the same 5 enemies over and over again. Which, by the way that this game divvies out experience, you essentially only can fight enemies your level. And that's most JRPGs, because any other enemy that's below your level is not going to give you enough experience to even make it worth your time. So you might as well only fight things that are your level or higher in order to maximize your time grinding. So you're going to have to grind. That's just unless you switch it down to casual, most of that grind time is going to be removed. But most people, I feel like, are going to probably feel like they're going to have to stick to normal and not do that, so they're going to have to still grind. Side quests in this game suck. They're horrible. I mean, this is like the quintessential JRPG side quest bullcrap. Like, it's honestly like, I didn't even attempt to engage with the side quest. As soon as I read one side quest text that an NPC gave me, I was like, all right, well, I'm never reading any text that any NPC tells me ever again, because of course, like, they were like, hey, can you go find 5 herbs for me out in the environment and then come back? And it's like, okay, yeah. And then another one was like, hey, can you go find and kill 5 wolves in the environment and then come back? And I'm like, yeah, I can do that. So essentially that's all they are, is their fetch quests. They have really no bearing on anything. They're not even really attempting to make them worth anything contextually. It's basically just, hey, we're a JRPG. We know we have to have side quests. Go out and do them. Not only that, but you don't even get experience for doing the vast majority of side quests. You only get money, which money is only useful in buying equipment. and technically arts, but like I'm most of the time you're going to be okay on arts. So like technically arts is going to be the main thing you're going to want to buy with money, but like the other main thing you're going to want to buy is armor, but you're honestly going to get way better drops from enemies than at stores. Like a store is like your last ditch effort. Like if you are just like holy frick, I cannot walk another step in this game for whatever reason. I mean, I guess then you need to go to a store and buy something. You really should never go to a store and buy something. You should just go out and kill things and you will get better armor than what stores are offering you. So that's completely worthless. So side quest, and then even worse, it's like they just want to torture you because you'll talk to us to an NPC and they'll give you a side quest and they will immediately have another side quest available for you to engage with. So I just sat there and I just mashed A for like freaking a minute and a half waiting for these guys to give me like 5 different side quests of just go out and collect this thing or kill this thing. And then if I ever saw an exclamation point on my map, I would just run over to it and kill it or grab it and then just call it a day. Like I really it's really sad to think that like this was ever an acceptable way of designing a game. But in all honesty, this was just simply how these games were designed now. Like now we have games like The Witcher where every side quest is an amazing, like almost main quest worthy component to the game, but you know, like now it's inexcusable for that to be the case anymore. Like but prior to that, you had to have side quests and most of the time they would just be garbage filler. So that's still here and it's very frustrating. I didn't appreciate how they did party structuring or affinities. Affinities in this game are basically how you make relationships with people. You can literally have a relationship with any NPC with a name. If you talk to them enough, if you do enough side quests, you will eventually get a relationship with these people, and all of them have affinities. There is literally no reason for you to do it, at least that I ever saw. That was freaking retarded. So that's cool. And then affinities with your party only you can only gain affinities with party unless you can give them gifts, but I never really engaged with that. Or you have to have them in your party. So, for instance, Shulk can only gain affinity for Rhine if you have him in the party at the exact same time. And if he's not, then he will never gain affinity for that character, and so on and so forth. And you can swap out your characters whenever you want. Great, love it, fantastic. But it means that your affinity for these characters is often going to be really low because most characters aren't ever going to have a lot of affinity for any given character. Not only that, but it takes a really long time to build affinity. Like by the end of the game, I started getting max affinity with certain characters, which you'd think sounds understandable, but there's affinity cutscenes that you can find in this game in which you talk with your party members and get to know them better. I literally only ever did one, and it was the tutorial one. Because every other time I either did not have a party member in my party when I found an affinity place for a conversation, or my affinity was way too low. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm just never ever seeing any of these. And I didn't. I didn't ever see any of them. So I felt like I was missing out on a significant moments of building an experience and a relationship with my party members, which I felt like was probably a very big part of the game, but I felt like the game almost told me like you need to really do this on New Game Plus in order to see any of these. And I'm like, I don't think that's how you should really be optimizing this experience. You should probably be making it pretty easy for people to see these things like from the jump, really. So you feel like you're very attached to these characters as you're going through the experience. What else did I not like? I mean, like literally you can think of anything else. This game you are in menus 90% of the time. You will fight a thing and you will level up and you will get a new art and you will have to go in and read the art and then change it out. And then art is a move, by the way, for you to use in combat. And then you will also get an armor drop and you're going to have to go into your menu and you're going to have to swap out that armor because now that armor gives you 20 plus defense. You're like, that's a big enough jump. I need to swap that out. Well, you got to do that for that character. And then you're going to get another drop and you're going to have to swap it out for the other character in your party and so on and so forth. So you're in this game's menus like 90% of the time, which, by the way, Definitive Edition apparently had a major overhaul to the menu system. The menu system in the original release was apparently super convoluted, was not easy to get around, and a lot of the major information that you needed was obfuscated and not easy to find, which is crazy because you are in menus so much in this game, which is, by the way, just a typical old school JRPG trapping that is normally a thing. Speaking of which, another thing that they added to Definitive Edition was auto run, which I found pretty comical. When I found out what auto run was initially in the game, I was a little surprised that it was a weird way of doing it. So you can press up on the D-pad and your player character will automatically run forward, no matter where they are. And they will just continue running forward unless you move them with the analog stick. And it's essentially supposed to make getting around environments easier. And you're like, well, what is so painstaking about getting around environments that you need an auto run that just moves you forward? Well, these areas are massive. Like, they're really, really big. Like, it takes a long time just to get from point A to point B. And that's why they, in the Switch 2 patch, added like basically a freaking hover vehicle to get around. And so now you're zooming through areas. But even zooming through areas, I was like, dang, this still takes a minute to get from point A to point B. It's kind of crazy. But it's just it's kind of crazy how it's a kind of a double-edged sword. The environments being so massive is really a technical marvel and very fun to get around. But it's also like, dang, I really just kind of want to get through this area, and you won't be able to physically for a long time. So there's that. I feel like literally any JRPG trope you're thinking of, Xenoblade kind of falls into that bucket. That being said, I also think getting around the environments is super cool because it's super varied. I think that the story moments happen at a pretty regular clip. I think that it has a slow start, though. That's another thing to mention, is you really have to kind of commit to this game. But at the same time, that is, again, a very old school JRPG trapping. You're kind of going to have a very slow start. Like, get ready to play for like 2 to 3 hours before really the inciting incident happens. Like, that's just kind of normal. So if you've ever seen Scott the Woz, he's a YouTube comedian of sorts. He has a video on not liking JRPGs, and he lists out all the reasons that he doesn't. And in all honesty, the vast majority of them are very understandable. Like, this is a genre that I'm honestly very surprised was as successful as it is and is still as successful as it is. Now, that being said, JRPGs have evolved significantly with the times. And I think going back to a JRPG like this, I definitely see its age. I definitely see that this is a game that probably, if I had to guess, I don't know what they've updated in 2 and 3 because I've never played Xenoblade 2 and 3. But if I had to guess, it would be a harder sell for a modern audience. There would have to be some tweaks here. There would have to be some changes in order to really have a mass appeal. And maybe they didn't do that and people still love this series. But I really do think that a lot of those people are enjoying the nostalgia, to be frank, of a old school JRPG. Now, this is a 92 on Metacritic. Very, very, very high. And you're saying, Henry, you say a lot of bad things about this game. I don't know. You think 92? Obviously not. I'm not willing to say 92. I'm willing to say it does everything right that it needs to do right. I'm willing to say that its combat is not a problem. And therefore, what it does wrong are all these like minor things that really JRPGs have evolved from now and aren't that big of a deal. They're fine. I didn't hate any of the nitpicks that I was just kind of spouting off. They're all kind of, like I said, normal JRPG trappings, but not a big problem, right? So overall, this game lands everywhere it needs to. Really, combat, I really could have taken or leaving. But at that point, I feel like a lot of people probably felt the same. So it really does what it needs to in immersing me in a cool world with good characters and a story that keeps me hooked from beginning to end. And that is amazing. So, as somebody who's a little bit more nostalgic prone to a game like this, I have nostalgia for these old RPG, mechanics and trappings and stuff. I felt like this game was, for me, like an 87, which is pretty close to where Xenoblade kind of falls now. Like, I think the definitive edition is an 89, and in this case, I feel like it's an 87 for me. There's a couple of nitpicks that I felt were knocking me back and forth throughout the game, but in general, the things that were so good about Xenoblade were were just really 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 good. Like, I really enjoyed them. So if I had to say, like, for like a new player, if you never grew up with the same games I did, you haven't really played that many JRPGs, you're saying I really want to get into JRPGs, what's the game I should do to do it? I would say that player is probably going to play this game and maybe say this is an 83, 84. Like, they probably wouldn't be as forgiving to the problems that I've listed, but they still would have a good time, leveling up, doing strategy with combat. More so, the story and the characters in the world are all going to be pretty interesting and hooking. So I think that player is going to be a lot more interested. So that's kind of where I feel like it lands. It's a little all over the place, right? People, as it was when the game first came out, I can see being very impressed by it. 92 honestly seems pretty understandable given how technically impressive this game is as a JRPG. Now I feel like people would have softened on it a little bit because it is a little dated, and I think that if you don't have nostalgia for that, you're going to even think it's a little bit worse. So that's kind of where I think that falls. And then, of course, Future Connections. So, Future Connections, I'll touch on briefly. Future Connections is an extra episode that they added to the Definitive Edition to kind of sweeten the pot a little bit. It is one more story that kind of ties up some loose ends with the Xenoblade game, and it focuses on Melia, who's one of your party members. So, it does not focus on Shulk, even though he's there. And she has to deal with some things that she encounters or is kind of left unsettled, I guess, by the end of the campaign. And it makes total sense why they felt the need to go back and kind of tie up those loose ends. But I think that this DLC is, as somebody who literally finished the main campaign, I was already kind of done with it. I was already like, I've played 60 hours of this game. I got the climactic finish. I really don't need any more Xenoblade right now. Future Connections was really meant for people who had beaten the original Xenoblade and bought the game again for the definitive edition. So this was more game for them. And for them, I think you're probably getting a good deal here. The environment is pretty large. There are some changes here to the combat, which I think was pretty divisive. I don't think a lot of people would have liked, to be quite honest. They take out a lot of your party members. They add kind of a new thing where you have to go and collect little minions to then help you fight and do special attacks in combat. Um, it was at least different, and I'll give it that. And I kind of wanted something different after playing the 60-hour campaign, so I appreciated it in that aspect. But I can see some people not appreciating any changes to the combat. They do not focus on literally any other party members outside of Shulk and Melina. And Shulk is not really focused on. He's just kind of there as, like, well, he's the protagonist. He kind of has to be. And like everybody else is a side character or a new character that was really not in the original game. So it really isn't that much of an incentive to come back unless you just love Melina or you really want to see every loose end tied up within the game story. And by the way, I didn't really even feel like I needed the loose end that was tied up within this. It's a major loose end, and I understand why they felt the need to do it. But like at the same time, I was like, yeah, I'm really okay to move on. I got it's not even that long, about 7 to 10 hours, depending on how much you want to do in it. And I bailed. I got about 75% of the way through, and I was like, I just don't feel the need to finish this. Like, I know what's going to happen. The story isn't necessarily like the original game, in which there's a lot of twists and turns. It felt like there was, even for that, there was padding within the story of a 7 to 10 hour JRPG side story, which I felt like was completely unnecessary. And when I got to the padding points, I was just like, okay, we're good. I think I know what's going to happen. In fact, I know what's going to happen. I don't have to even look it up. I know what was going to happen. And I was just like, okay, I think I'm good. I'm going to walk on this. And so I did. So, is Future Connections good? If you're somebody who literally just can't get enough of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and just wants more, absolutely. Yeah. You get it basically for the price of entry, so why not? It's basically just a cherry on top. There's no reason to get mad at Future Connections. Just don't play it. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But in general, I think like if this game, the thing about this as an expansion is it's not really one, but Xenoblade Chronicles 2 has an expansion, and it has like, because it's a full-on expansion, it got reviews and everything. Since this is just kind of an add-on to a main game, technically, it doesn't have reviews. But I think that this game would have reviewed much poorer. I think this game would have probably been in the mid 70s if I had to guess. People probably wouldn't have taken as nicely to it. So, in general, I wouldn't really recommend Future Connections unless you just need more of the game. Probably pop in. I mean, if you already have Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, just pop in. Pop in, see if you like it. If you really want more, if you're enticed by what's going on, yeah, stick with it. It's not even that long, 7 to 10 hours. But since I had already committed 60 hours of my life and I knew I had a million other games to play, I was like, I'm really not going to stick with this if I already know what's going on, not too invested in the combat, not invested in the characters, not invested in the story. I'm good. So I walked. So in general, though, Xenoblade Chronicles is a very good package overall. I'd highly recommend it, to be quite frank. And I am very interested to see where Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and 3 take me. Heard great things or mixed things about 2, but I really hope I'm going to come out loving 2. Who knows when the heck I'm going to have time to get around to it. We're about to get into a very busy release season here in games, and committing yourself to another 2 JRPGs just seems like that's just the rest of the year. At that point, I won't have any time. So who knows? But overall, I'm very glad I got to experience Xenoblade Chronicles. Enjoyed my time with it. Wish it was shorter, but I wished about that about like every game. Even if it's like a 5-hour game, I'm like, dang, this really needed to be 5 hours. Really could have done it in 2. Like I need to get on to the next game. But that's just a product of the times we live in. Just too many good games to play. But as you can tell, my voice is starting to give, so I need to head on. It's been a nice 2-hour episode, a little bit meatier than I expected it to be, but we had a lot to dive into, a lot to delve into. I hope you appreciated the research I did for this episode, because it was probably more than I needed to, but I'm just weirdly autistic like that. I have to do it, have to dive into the numbers. Let's do the research. I also just can't be wrong. So, I'm sure I am. I'm sure somebody's going to be in the comments and be like, you're dumb. You're a stupid idiot, dumb. And, it'll ruin my week. Why did I even put 18 hours into researching PlayStation's physical and digital sales over the past 5 years? Ugh. But, that is the life I lead. But anyways, thank you for listening to this episode of the Plug and Play podcast. I hope you're doing well. Hope your family's doing well. Say hi to the wife for me, would you? I hope she's doing well. Beautiful woman, that wife of yours. But hope you're playing some good games. Hope you continue to. And I hope to hear you or see you or speak to you next time. Bye-bye.